Good morning. I'm Reverend Michelle Scott-Huffman. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the minister here at First UU and excited to be here on this Water Communion Sunday. So my family and I have a favorite place that we camp and float the Niangua River just outside of Lebanon. And we usually try to make it there a couple of times in the summer. And this particular summer just hasn't been cooperative. So we've tried, but we haven't had a whole lot of luck. So on the weekend that we had scheduled to go, Morgan, my youngest child, and I braved the 100-degree temperatures to get everything set up on Friday. My sister Tammy, who's the diehard camper and also a little bit of a river rat, even she joined us the next morning just in time to get on the river. She had some excuse about how she was working late and couldn't get there to camp the night before. The rest of my immediate family said, no, absolutely not. We're not camping. Alexis, my oldest daughter, and her boyfriend Mark came just in time to get on the river, and they took out at the first takeout point and left and drove back to Springfield. So our time on the river wasn't exactly as like joyful and relaxing as it often was. So my nephew even couldn't make it because he was on a post-graduation trip with some of his friends. So this trip that's supposed to be like a sisters and cousins trip became like just me and one of my kids and my sister kind of. So it was an interesting kind of space. And we usually try to float the river on Friday because I don't know if you know this or not, but people who float during the week on a river and people who float on Saturday are different kinds of people. So my Catholic friends describe the difference between like Saturday night Catholics and Sunday morning Catholics. With all due respect to the Catholics, you all know I have like a Pope crush. So I love the Catholics. But there's something similar about like water exploration. Like Saturday river people are different than like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday river people. So we're out on the river with all of the people on the Saturday. We're floating along, and just after we get past Bennett Springs, where the water gets really cold because the spring is feeding into the river, and there are lots of irritated people who are trying to fish around the kayaks and the canoes and the rafts. Maybe they didn't get the memo about how the river is different on Saturday, and they should have just taken off. I don't know. So they're all irritated. So Alexis and I are floating up kind of ahead of everyone else, and we're talking about trout because she's grown up around trout fishermen, and she loves the rainbow trout, and we're watching them, and there's these huge like schools of fish, and they're jumping, and it's really fun. And then all of a sudden, these two fish jump out of the river, and one of them lands in her lap, in her kayak. Most of you don't know my daughter Alexis, but she's not too fond of creatures like landing on her. She can swat a horsefly when it's on her horse, and that'll be fine. But the whole like landing on her, that's a whole different story. So Alexis is like trying to get this fish out of her lap, and this isn't, even though it was with the school of trout, this is not a trout, right? It's a smallmouth bass. So smallmouth bass have these like spiny dorsal fins. So she's got this like pokey fish in her hand. She's like, what do I do? And then she throws it in the river. And we like laughed so hard that we cried, and then some. And it was a great time. So after that, we were talking about the like biodiversity in the river, right? Even the smallmouth bass that was hanging out with the trout, and they were jumping together, and remembering the time that we had gone camping and came back from the weekend, and there was a crawdad in my cooler, and I had to figure out how to rehome the crawdad in Springfield because I couldn't, what am I gonna do? Like, he's living in my cooler in some water that came back with us. And thinking about just all of the different things that live in the river, and it's just awe-provoking, right? the ways that all of this life kind of comes together and somehow supports one another in the river. Information online about Bennett Springs says that there are 54 species of fish, 20 amphibians, 33 reptiles, 173 birds, 32 mammals, 53 miscellaneous invertebrates, and 125 insects living right there in the river in the Bennett Springs area. Now that's a whole lot of life under and on the surface of and around the river, that water. So when we began to talk about the Soul Matters theme of belonging and the intersection of that with the theme of water communion today, my mind immediately went to this idea of rivers of belonging. In part because it connects things that are deeply important to me. Rivers are kind of a holy place for me, this place where I kind of experience divine energy and presence in ways that I sometimes don't in other places. And this idea of belonging, of inclusion, like that's the thing. That's the crux of it all for me, right? The thing that we do in religion has to be about bringing more people into a wider and wider circle. And so I was thinking about this idea of rivers of belonging in that way. And also because rivers serves as a spiritual metaphor in many religious traditions. So I'll read just from Psalm 137 in the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew Bible. There's a text heading, which is not a part of the original text. We could talk about that some other time. But a text heading for Psalm 137 that says, while in captivity, the Jews wept by the rivers of Babylon. Because of sorrow, they could not bear to sing the songs of Zion. And the psalm says, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps on the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song. And they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. And the people of Israel sat beside the rivers of Babylon, and they lamented together, and they wept together, and they were community together outside of the place that they had previously learned to be community. So I feel like this idea of rivers in spirituality is a really powerful one. And so I made a river up here. It's a little rough, but hopefully you can appreciate it. There's a song that's been deeply meaningful in my own life and spiritual journey as well. And I'm excited that the choir began working on it this morning. And I hope that we get to hear it next month. It's called Stepping In, and it's written by someone named Christopher Grundy. And the first verse of the song says, there is a prayer like a wide river. It never ends, does not begin. Around the world, it's always flowing. And I am stepping in. We are stepping in. Today, I want to invite you to step in to the spiritual metaphor of the river with me and to imagine what it might look like for us to come together as a river of belonging. There are three specific characteristics of rivers that I'm thinking of today that are important for this metaphor, and also for a reminder about why we have to work to keep our rivers healthy and decrease our demand for water that depletes our rivers and other sources of water. The first is that rivers are lifelines to the world. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they say that roughly 3.5 million miles of rivers and tributaries in the United States connect us to the sea. Even if we live far inland, most Americans live within a mile of a river or stream. Rivers provide our communities with economic, ecological, and cultural value. River habitats vary from high stony streams to flowing channels for ships and boats to shallow wetland deltas. Rivers have striking regional differences that create distinct habitats. A river bend may be stony or soft, lush with underwater vegetation, murky or clear. Each type of river and each different type of habitat within a river provides an ideal environment for different species at different life stages. How beautiful is that? The second characteristic of rivers that feels important today is that rivers are the unsung heroes of biodiversity. Members of the Millennium Alliance for Humanity and the Biosphere, writing before the October 2021 Convention on Biological Diversity, argued that member countries must prioritize protecting regions where biodiversity is highest, or where restoration will bring the greatest net benefits. Rivers, which support an extraordinary number of species, must be a priority zone for protection and restoration. Though freshwater covers less than 1% of all the water on the planet's surface, it provides habitats for an astonishing number of species. Rivers are vital for conserving and sustaining wetlands, which house and provide breeding grounds for around 40% of Earth's species. And the third characteristic of rivers that feels important to us today is that rivers harness collaborative power to literally shape and change the landscape. Dana Driscoll, who writes at the Druid's Garden, has this to say about the significance of rivers. When you follow a river to its source, follow the water's path upstream and take the largest of the tributaries each time the river splits, this gives you a unique perspective in that you can witness how the river at its current size is built of smaller tributaries. These tributaries, some permanent springs, other rain gullies, and other seasonal contributors, aren't just part of the river, they are the river. If you follow the river to its source, you will learn that each river starts off as a tiny stream or freshwater spring. The river only later grows larger as other tributaries feed into it. Each one of us is that stream. Each one of us has the potential of that spring that starts the river off. It is only through the power of others flowing together in unison that we can be a river. The strength of a great river cannot be ignored. It shapes the landscape around it and brings significant change. So as we look at our river up here, as we think about our experiences of rivers in our lives, I imagine you all have wonderful stories about rivers that you've stood beside, rivers that you've floated in, rivers that you've dipped a hand in, rivers that have just drawn awe and wonder out of you as you stood and looked at their vastness or their tininess. I hope in this reflection of rivers that something in you has been sparked that now wants to both appreciate and protect a river. Don't go on Saturday. Go some other time. There's so much more that we could talk about protecting the water, protecting the rivers, rejuvenating the places where biodiversity is able to thrive. So if you're looking for a place to get connected with river protection efforts, you can find local and regional resources, groups, and efforts at www.rivernetwork.org. I've been listening to a wonderful podcast this week from a group called American Rivers, which talks a lot about the rivers in the western part of the United States. Really wonderful group doing wonderful things. But also, I always hope that when I'm talking, you're hearing what I'm saying on both a practical level, go take care of the rivers, and a spiritual level. What is going on inside myself and in this community for our spiritual growth together and the transformation of ourselves and the world around us. So I hope that I've also sparked your imagination about how together we form a human river of belonging. So let me bring the metaphor home, if you will. taking the language from the characteristics of rivers, changing it to communities of care or some description of this community. Communities of care and spiritual growth are a lifeline to the world. I would guess that many of the people in this room have experienced this community or a community like it as a lifeline before. And I could talk for hours about the different ways that we become a lifeline for the people who need that. But I want to leave that to your imagination right now, to think about the ways that this community can be a lifeline to the world. Secondly, that inclusive communities that welcome all are the unsung heroes of human diversity. There are spaces in our world that don't honor diversity, that don't cultivate diversity, that don't appreciate diversity, and spaces that do, spaces that welcome people from all different walks of life, people who believe differently, even when it's all these different religious expressions or none of them. The way that you come into the space being authentically and fully whoever you are, that kind of diversity gets nurtured in this space. And that makes spaces like this the unsung heroes of human diversity. And caring communities that invite the gifts and compassions of everyone to set the agenda, harness the collective power to literally shape and change our landscape. Now, we've been living in a landscape for a while, politically, socially, environmentally, that I think most of us would like to have a bigger power to shape and change. And that power is collectively built in spaces like this, where people come together and where everyone gets to set the agenda, where everyone gets to sort of define what the mission of the place is going to be, sort of define the ways that we're going to act for justice in the world. And we do that with the voices of people, not just who are privileged and who think they can save the world, but people who also have experienced marginalization themselves, the people who have been closest to the pain, coming into the space and saying, this is what is needed. Let's work together to do it. The collective power to shape and change landscapes. Y'all, that's the kind of religious experience that I want to be a part of. The kind that changes lives, that changes communities, that changes the way we engage with each other and with the issues of our day. So again, there is a prayer, like a wide river. It never ends, does not begin. Around the world, it's always flowing, and I am stepping in. We are stepping in. Blessed be, and amen.